Uber drivers, what's the deepest secrets you've overheard in your car? One time I was driving a dude for a bit of a long trip. Was gonna take around 25-30 minutes. He wasn't hammered, but definitely a bit drunk. It was late and he must have been feeling a bit down. So he confided in me and asked me for some advice. He told me he's madly in love with his fiance's best friend and he couldn't back out now. He'd been with this girl 4 years. And engaged for 1. Ready to be married in a few months. It was pretty sad to hear. Because it wasn't just your average story. It was filled with a lot of subtle emotional and mental anguish. The guy went through about 5 years of ups and downs with his girl. And found an innocent friend and comfort in the best friend. After a few years, he developed feelings and it was just downhill from there. Felt bad for the guy because he seemed like he was truly in love with his fiancée too. Although he had strong feelings for this friend. He knew that going through with the marriage meant a lifetime of being around the friend and suppressing feelings. But also breaking it off meant that he lost the girl of his dreams. Seemed like a genuinely nice guy. And I hope he's doing okay. I picked up this young overly affectionate couple that spent the entire trip making out in my backseat and telling each other that they loved each other. Cute. So I drop off the couple and head on my way to pick up my text fare. I hear a cell phone ring in my backseat. Realize it's my previous rides. And pick up the phone to let them know I have it and I'll come back to drop it off. Turns out it was the guy's wife phoning to check in on him while he was on a business trip. Which he was thoroughly enjoying with his mistress. Former Uber driver here. Picked a girl up, a sweet girl from a bar on a Wednesday night, absolutely hammered. About 10 PM. She got into my car. Apologized for being so drunk and politely asked if we could just drive around a little while. With the windows down. I was prepping for a cleaning fee. Trying to drive and pull a vomit bag out of the glove box. But no. She just did that airplane thing with one hand out the backseat window. She asked me if I had ever thought about dying. To which I replied, yeah, I guess so. That's when she told me that she had cancer. It was in her brain and it was too far gone to consider chemo. I remember my heart just pounding. She told me she was dying and she was going to be okay. Tonight she was celebrating with her work friends who threw her a going away party. She told them she was taking a position abroad. I just didn't tell them that abroad was heaven. Double quote. Jesus. Fucking Christ. I turned off my app and cried my ass all the way home. I drove a lot of college-age girls that were looking for a sugar daddy. They wanted 30-year-old men, no children. Good job. Willing to buy them lots of things, pay rent. Bills. I had no idea this was so popular. But practically every girl that age that opened her mouth about a guy in my car went on about his age, job, and money. One girl even admitted to f***ing someone with the same name and of the same age as her dad. I am not an Uber driver, but I have one that was told to me. This driver told me that he picked up his last fare for the day and it did not have a final destination. The dude gets in the car coked out of his mind yelling on the phone. The guy says drive to Vegas. Here. And the guy tosses $500 bucks at him. That is on top of the Uber fare, which apparently was surge pricing. So the guy drives him to Vegas. From Los Angeles takes about 4 hours. The whole time the guy is talking yelling on the phone to his mom. They get to Vegas and he drops the dude off at some mansion where his mom is outside waiting to yell at him. Apparently the guy forgot about giving him the cash because he tossed another few $100 at him. Got out of the car and split. Picked up a girl mid-Saturday. She was a bit upset and a little teary and opened up to me. Turned out a business she had started was failing and she was in debt and had turned to stripping on the side to cover the bills. She said the pay was good but she kept getting really sick from all the booze she felt obliged to drink. Part of her job was making guys spend money at the bar. She hated it and felt trapped and kept asking me what I would do in her situation. I'm a guy. So kind of hard for me to answer. Tried to give her the best advice I could think of, like getting the tax office to withhold tax for a while. But couldn't help really. Only thing I could do was end the trip early. Other one was a couple of off-duty cops who didn't want their friends to know they were using it. Uber is still in a legal grey area here. Stripper girl apparently didn't know the usual trick for strippers. Usually if they don't want to actually drink, they talk to the bartender before they open up and the bartender will give them non-alcoholic drinks for the night. Otherwise most strippers wouldn't have a liver anymore. I haven't really heard anything too juicy, but so far my favorite was this one. I picked up two guys in downtown LA. From their conversation I gather they'd just met at the bar I picked them up from and were going home to hook up. One was younger and clean cut. The other was older and rather scruffy. So I'm driving up Main Street to the 101 and the scruffy guy starts talking about how he used to live there in the 90s and it was a whole lot scummier back then. He mentions he used to have an older boyfriend back then. The boyfriend would call the scruffy guy and tell him to walk down to the sidewalk in a tied off shirt and Daisy Dukes. Then the boyfriend would drive up in his car and the scruffy guy would lean in his window and the boyfriend would ask him how much. And the scruffy guy would get in and they'd roleplay that he was a prostitute and the boyfriend was his John. The clean cut guy kinda glossed over this and moved the conversation along. But I thought to myself that scenario sounds hot as hell. You should look up Taxicab Confessionals, it's a whole show about this from the 90s. And it's amazing. Also, someone should totally reboot this into Uber Confessionals. I remember this show on HBO. 12-year-old me was dumbfounded on a boring Thursday at 11 PM when I flipped the channel to see this random couple talking about all the crazy places they've had sex. And then the chick jumps on the guy and starts banging him right then and there. Two 40-something guys who I picked up from a bar were talking on a phone speaker, and they were trying to make plans with a third guy who was at a party with a bunch of drunk 12th graders. Exact words. One guy in my car asked if there was anyone younger there. Other dude said, "Dude, really?" Comma. Followed by silence. Then he said, "Fucking sweet." Not sure as there was missing context, but it sounded like there was younger teenagers there already drunk and these older dudes were going to pick up. 1. Two girls talking about how they FK'd the same guy. Both agreed his DCK was too big and he was hurting them by lasting too long. Both concluded he was gay. 2. Two middle-aged couples trying to agree to a foursome. Took this 19-year-old kid and what I assumed was his GF back to her house on Pride weekend in SF. They made out the whole ride. When I dropped them off, only she got out. He said, "Take me to Castro and 18th. I said, "Really?" And he said, "Yeah. I only make out with girls when I'm rolling." Never a dull moment in San Francisco. It wasn't so much weird as it was random, but my first night driving for Uber Lyft I picked up a dude at 2:30 AM that was finishing up a pub crawl. The dude was dressed in a purple dinosaur onishi and was hammered. He got in and started telling me his entire life story and how he came out to his parents and moved across the country the next day. I've asked this question countless times to Uber drivers. Usually I don't get anything that's worth remembering since it's normal stories about drunk people. But here's one that stands out. Uber driver says he picks up 3 Brazilians. 2 girls and a guy. He said all 3 were attractive. One of the girls and the guy start making out. Not that unusual per the other stories here, but the story takes a turn when the other girl in the car, the one not sucking face, tells the driver that the couple making out are twins. Brother and sister. She said they do that when they get drunk together. He said it was the purest form of narcissism he's ever witnessed. Quite the opposite, but just tried Uber for the first time 2 nights ago. We asked the lady what the craziest tea that's ever happened to her was. She was pretty. She proceeds to tells us a dude grabbed her favd and tried to force her to kiss him. Luckily she has some sort of brass knuckle thing and it put a hole in his cheek. Jesus FCK, that gave me such a justice erection. Just the other night a girl climbed in the backseat with her bag on the way to the airport. She was on the phone with her boyfriend and they were having a bit of a tiff. Apparently she was about to board a one-way plane to go move in with him. Ended up driving her back home after going all the way there. Her in tears. As they had apparently decided maybe living together wasn't such a good idea. Trouble I forgot to turn the stereo back on and couldn't just turn on music in the middle of her phone conversation, so I tried my best to listen to the air conditioning fan in silence both there and back. Made myself a cool $26. My dad was a taxi driver for around a year. He once picked up this woman with 2 children. The woman put both kids in the car and ran back in to grab her pushchair. My dad drives off thinking that she was in the car and starts to talk to her. He then realized OFCK she's not in the car. He drives back and it turns out she was on the phone to the police saying a man drove off with my kids. He got back and she was fine and they laughed about it after. Late to the party. But I once drove some well-dressed Russians in between bars on the west side of Chicago. I used to work for a Russian-owned cab company and I understand a little Russian. And I heard 2 of them talking back and forth about something one of them was very anxious about. The phrases that jumped out at me were "this is death. This is serious. Blood is on me. And I'm not a bad man." The other guy was mainly just telling him to relax a lot. And telling him there are no fools here. Or something along those lines. Upon dropping them off. Like an idiot. I temporarily blanked that I had just heard parts of a seemingly harrowing conversation. And I said Cisadilla L, which is pronounced Dobroy Nochi and means good night. Only one of them heard me, the older guy telling his colleague to relax, and he just stared at me. Then he came around to my window while reaching into his coat pocket. Which scared me shitless. He then pulled out a $100 and said, in English, "My friend. Do we understand?" Double quote. I just took it. Shook my head in the affirmative. And drove off. I didn't take any rides for the rest of the night. Passenger here. Not driver. I live in Nick and I had to call the suicide hotline while coming home in an Uber from work because it was only place where I could be more or less alone. I am so thankful to the driver for being patient while I was crying and saying really f***ed up things. It was so obvious it was the last thing he wanted to deal with that night. Picked up a girl who had to go to work across town. Her boyfriend and her were arguing in the parking lot as I was approaching. Girl gets in my car and she's worried she's not going to get to work on time and she would be fired if she was late. Get about a block away and my phone rings. I answered and tried to get it off my Bluetooth stereo to no avail. The person on the other line was her BF and he said he wanted to apologize about his GF and that I shouldn't listen to her because she was a crazy BTCH. She heard all of it and didn't say a thing. Very awkward. Finally get her to work and she asks me to stay in the parking lot as she goes in and quits her job. She gets back a few minutes later and on the way home tells me that her boyfriend once broke her arm in an argument and that he was going to be very mad at her and she was worried about going back home but to take her there anyway. Ended up dropping her off and calling non-emergency, but I have no clue if anything ever happened with it. A few weeks back I picked up a woman from UT Arlington and drove her to DFW airport. We got stuck in traffic heading to the airport, so we started chatting about this and that. We started talking about our jobs and it turns out she was affiliated with an WNBA team from the Midwest. Her team had just beat the Dallas WNBA team by a sizable amount and was quite happy to share some info with me. She said she loved her job. Traveling. Doing something she loved, basketball, but she hated some of the players on the team. Divas. She called them. Said a few players treated her like shit and as a personal assistant. Which she claimed. She was not. As long as those bitches keep winning, I can deal with them. They're such sore losers. She laughed at that. I just chuckled along with her. Afterwards, I admitted that I didn't even know Dallas had a WNBA team, let alone any other major city. She smiled and told me she hears it a lot in all the cities she visits. So, while not the craziest thing ever, I still thought she was a memorable rider. Kind of cool, I think. Edit. Affiliated is more vague than what I had before and removed city. Not so much a dark secret, as much as a potentially dark situation. Driving around waiting for pings. Get one at a popular bar. Pull up and a young woman flags me down. Gives me her name. Asks for mine. I'm her ride. Easy enough. There's a guy with her. They're both quite drunk. She says goodnight to him and gets in the rear passenger side door. Homeboy isn't having it. Decides he's coming with. Starts trying to convince her. Despite her saying she has work early. Wants to get to sleep. But he's not taking no for an answer. It's getting a bit weird as he's getting more and more pushy aggressive about it. To the point that she's clearly uncomfortable. I step out of the car. And say over the top of the car, hey man. If she says you're not getting in the car. You're not getting in the car. He looks over at me with hate in his eyes. I'm a bit tense. Not knowing this kid's deal. He slams the door. Walks away. Talking shitty as he goes, really? Talking shitty as you walk away? What a hard ass. Get back in the car. Girl seems a little more sober after the experience. And is shaken up over it. Take her back home. Make sure she gets in safe. Not as scary or as weird as it could have been. But the dude gave off a bad vibe and I'm glad he took the hint and F-ked off. Drove for Lyft in Denver. CO, between jobs this summer. My third PAX ever. And he was going to the airport. He said he was moving to Florida. To get away from it all. But didn't have any luggage. Not even a carry-on. I wasn't going to say anything about it. But my curiosity got the best of me. So, where's all your luggage? Did you ship everything ahead of time? He doesn't say anything right away. And just as I was deciding that perhaps I wasn't going to get an answer. Nah. I just had my friend call me a Lyft and he set up my flight. I just escaped from prison but we look so much alike. His ID will work for me to travel. Asterisk. I was quiet the rest of the trip. My husband had a couple that broke up in the backseat of his car while driving for Uber. The woman made fun of her boyfriend's ex. And was talking about how she had bad teeth. The boyfriend said her teeth were fine and that she was being really judgy. She then asked him if he was still in love with his ex. He thought for a moment. Said yes. And she started crying. There was some kind of confusion about where to get dropped off since she just wanted to go home and he wanted to go somewhere the opposite direction. Super awkward for my husband. Not my story. But I had an Uber driver tell me this one. So I hope it counts by proxy. Uber driver George is doing Uber pool one night in Austin where you pick up multiple people en route to the destination. First girl number 1 gets in the car alone and sits in the backseat on the passenger side. Then a couple, guy and girl, comes. And there's not enough room for everyone in the back. So girl number 2 sits behind the driver and guy sits up front. The two girls in the back start chatting and seem to be getting along well. Girl number 1 asks what they are doing tonight. And girl number 2 says, "Oh. Me and my boyfriend Josh are going out to celebrate. Josh works at XX and just got a promotion." At this point, George notices Josh is crouching down in his seat and looking guilty. Then, girl number 1 says, "That's funny. My boyfriend is also named Josh and works at XX. I wonder if they know each other." Then girl number 2 starts tapping her boyfriend on the shoulder and bugging him to turn around to meet girl number 1. At some point Josh can't avoid the introduction anymore. And is forced to turn around. He does so with a look of utter horror on his face. As it slowly dawns on both girls that they are dating the same Josh. Anyway. Both girls start screaming and kick Josh out of the Uber. Not sure what happened after that. But you can bet Josh never took Uber pool again. Not an Uber driver. Work for a smallish cab company. We have a contract with schools in the area to transport seniors to this graduate program so they wouldn't drop out. Usually criminal or bad behaved kids. Etc. Anyway, I was assigned to this one kid from sophomore year. Heard some F-ked up things from other students about him, like he F-ked a guy in public. F-ked a dog. So on. He was usually quiet. Most conversations I started with him kinda just ended from awkward silence or him just ending it. One year he starts being more confident around me. Told me lot of F-ked up things. Mom abused him. Stole college money. Raped few years ago. Most bad things I heard about him were he was gay and he said that was about that. Etc. After that he tells me about his drug endeavors, I guess you'd call it. He actually gave me some seeds for growing for free. Last year I knew him, he was getting with a lot of girls from the school. Every day had me drove him with different girls. Eventually stuck with one. Told me about how some of these innocent girls did some crazy shit with him. Disappeared halfway through the year. Overheard from other drivers he killed himself. Oh man. Something relevant to me and I'm late. I had someone get in my car. Told me he's in his late 20s and that he's having sex with a girl who just recently turned 18. I awkwardly told him that's good for him and he proceeded to tell me that it's not. That his life sucks and everything he does to make himself happy doesn't work. He told me he watches vids of people committing suicide and wishes he had the courage they did to go through with it. He told me he's going to go to San Francisco and spend every last penny he has on vacation and just jump off the Golden Gate Bridge when he's done. I didn't really know what to say. When I dropped him off I told him that I hope things start looking up and he just said they won't. They never do and left. He also asked weird questions like, if I hit you would you kick my ass? When I said I'd rather no one hit anyone he said, dude, you'll whoop my ass, I'm a f***ing piece of shit. Double quote. Hope he got help. I had an in-depth conversation about first times in the drive-thru at Jack in the Box with a girl who just lost her virginity in a one-night stand with a dude she had the hots on. I turned off the meter and added her on Snapchat. We became mega bros immediately. I drive in a college town and I picked up a local chick from a bar passed out drunk. I was extremely hesitant but the bartender himself stepped out to assure me she had already puked for an hour and was ready to get home. He hands me her ID and says take her here. However, the Uber app is telling me to take her elsewhere. Given her slumpness I just took her to the address on her ID, which was 40 minutes outside the city I did T-mind because prices were surging and I would be looking at figures. About 25 minutes passed and I get a call from her boyfriend. He says something along the lines of how far away are you? I say 15 and hang up. He calls me back and asks where I'm taking her. I explain the situation and he then tells me that's the wrong address and to bring her to him. I finally pull up and he comes into the car and wakes her up and she begins freaking TF out. I'm talking flailing like a 5-year-old. Yelling things like why am I here, I don't want to be with you. I do want it to happen again. Needless to say I was shocked and had the worst guilty conscience thinking I redirected her from her home to an abusive situation with a potentially abusive boyfriend. Not a driver, but a passenger. A long drive on my way to the airport. Took about an hour. The driver seemed, and I'm sure was, really nice. And we chatted along as we went. After a while though, his topics of choice get a bit more touchy, as he starts going into religion and similar things. Not really feeling up to it. I mostly just agree. Which I suppose he takes for assent. Because he delves into this 40-minute expose about how religion, despite professing being a religious man himself, is just a front for big business. And that Christian churches and priests are really all just working with the CIA. Being mouthpieces and more importantly information gatherers. And that the CIA uses these religious institutions as places to launder their money and channel money into illegal ventures to destabilize regions abroad. Knowing no one will think a church would do that. While not agitated per se. He got more and more riled up as he went along. I was so f***ing sure I would never make the airport. But rather be found dead in a ditch somewhere after non-committally agreeing with the wrong statement. Not the driver, but chatted with one of my Lyft drivers and asked a similar question. He picked up some guy from a hotel and they started talking since it was a pretty long ride to the airport. Apparently the guy came for a business conference and ended up f***ing a married lady who was very high up in the company. Like, VP of sales high up. He then proceeded to show the Lyft driver pictures and a video of what they did last night. Before you ask. Yes. I did ask if the girl in the pictures was hot and he confirmed she was. Lucky son of a bitch. This was only about my 10th ride. I picked up these two girls from a house late at night. They seemed about mid-20s and one was more attractive than the other. Anyway, it was about a 35-minute ride since there was no traffic, and halfway through the more attractive one starts talking about what she was doing at the house I picked them up from. Turns out it was her first time trying to get paid for sex, and she kept going on about how paranoid the guy was and how he almost got violent because he thought she might be an undercover cop. She had to show him her FB profile and license to convince him. Not an Uber driver, but I have a story about a black cab driver I had once in London. Once he found out I was from Brighton, gay capital of the UK. He presumed I was gay. Then starts talking to me about gay friends I have. Gay clubs. About how he used to live there. Then chatting about HIV statistics. I did a virology bar, so we were chatting about it. And basically about 15 minutes in admits he has a wife but doesn't love her and fancies some young fella from his local. Very awkward, go say the least. But then he started asking about more and more intimate questions. About my package size. And sex stories I have. But on the positive, I got a 5 and knocked off my fare cause I showed him a DCK pic. I had an Uber driver today that told me he drove this guy somewhere a little over an hour away to drop off his keys to a friend. The guy also requested that the driver wait for him so he could drive him back to the place he had originally been picked up from. The guy came back with a cigar box, and when the driver looked back he realized he was cutting up a line of coke. He acted like he didn't see it, BC he was gonna make a lot of money off of this long ride. This story didn't seem too bizarre until he told me that he's actually a deputy in the county that this drug deal took place on. Not an Uber driver, but drove a taxi in my small town for a while. One time I was bringing this couple back from the bar to a small town about 20 minutes outside of town. Most people use the ride to try and fool around in the backseat or do coke. These two people were going at it like animals. I had to tell them to keep their clothes on or else they'd be cleaning the car out personally. It was at this time that, for no fking reason whatsoever, the guy says to me, "Don't tell anybody you saw us. Because we are first cousins," and then went back to some heavy making out and fondling. I had no idea who they were. Would have never connected the dots they were cousins. I thought nothing abnormal of the relationship that was aggressively forming in the backseat until they revealed their big secret. Lots of other stupid stuff happened. But that mild incident sticks out in my mind the most. There was one time I got an Uber request from right around the corner from where I was. About 7 AM when it came in. I pulled up to this apartment complex and waited about 10 minutes. I didn't know the rules on waiting. I decided to call after this and got a man who was very clearly drunk. We spoke every 5 minutes for the next 25 minutes because he didn't understand that I was already there. Eventually this girl in a short dress carrying her heels came out and thanked me profusely for saving her. Apparently the dude was trying to keep her there and was taking her phone every time I called. She had regretted going home with him and was trying to get out of there all night.